There is a curve that most people never see. It doesn't appear on life's maps, isn't taught in schools, marked in calendars, or passed down through family advice. And yet one day it arrives, and quietly, irreversibly, it changes everything. From the outside, the change can look small. The body moves a fraction slower. Days become simpler, less cluttered. Emotions settle into a softer register. But inside, along an axis most of us never measured, something shifts. The soul, that interior compass we rarely consult, begins to change direction. This shift is not a dramatic break. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It feels more like an inner weathering, a steady wind that blows away priorities that once seemed unassailable. The hunger to please others dulls, the urge to prove ourselves dissolves. Ambitions that once burned with urgency lose their heat or reveal themselves as thin veneers over deeper needs. What was once forward now turns inward, not in retreat, but as a symbolic returning a patient, purposeful homecoming. Carl Jung observed that the first half of life is largely about building the ego. The second half is about finding the soul. That return is not easy. By the time this curve appears, often around the age of 60, the things we tolerated earlier because they were useful or expedient no longer sit comfortably inside us. Masks become unbearable. Pretense tastes like ash. The soul demands an authenticity that asks for truth, even when the truth is painful. And pain is part of the price of this awakening, for it exposes the ways we spent years surviving rather than living. At 60, many of us look the same on the surface. Yet inside there is a kind of existential fatigue that is not the same as depression. It is clarity born of experience, a fatigue of the habitual. It says, without venom, I am done living to meet someone else's expectations. It asks for different measures of worth, not titles, not possessions, not applause, but the quiet metrics of meaning, presence, and fidelity to oneself. This is a time of re-examination. We revisit the story we told about ourselves, our marriages, our careers, the shape of our friendships, the bargains we made when we were younger. We are offered a chance to integrate what we once had to set aside. The wounded child still waiting for attention, the archived dreams gathering dust, the silenced intuition that never had space to speak. Jung called this the individuation process, the long arc by which separated parts of the self, the hidden feminine, the suppressed masculine, the child, the elder find their way into a single room and, at last, recognize one another. That recognition is not a punishment, it is possibility. Things that once felt like burdens begin to reappear as threads of a fabric that can be mended. Old wounds surface, not to accuse but to be healed. People, memories, places that once passed like scenery now return asking to be understood, forgiven, or lovingly set aside. Everything comes back not to hurt, but to be integrated. The longing at 60 is for wholeness. It is no longer for a new title, or a newer car, or a younger body. It is for silence, for peace, for the small, sure evidence that beauty and meaning still exist. The soul asks for space to breathe. It asks that we stop doing and start being, that we trade the treadmill of productivity for an attentiveness to our inner life. This change can be terrifying precisely because it is radical in its quietness. To inquire into one's life with unsentimental honesty takes courage. That courage is often rewarded in unexpected ways. Freed from the compulsion to perform, many begin to bloom. Women and men who have spent decades softening themselves for the comfort of others begin to stop apologizing for their presence. They refuse to dilute the strength that kept household and career afloat. They demand neither permission nor apology to simply exist. The beauty that emerges here is not decorative. It is the beauty of freedom, of truth, of a soul that has learned to speak without seeking permission. This beauty unsettles those who remain performing. It is too authentic, too quiet, too unmoving by the conventions that once measured value. And yet those who carry it need not know how visible they are. They simply live with an internal economy that no longer loans them approval from outside mirrors. They are present, and presence alone is infectious. Why do these questions arrive so insistently around 60? Because the soul does not follow a clock. It follows a summons. After decades of adaptation, management, and conquest, the inner life longs for reintegration. The shadow, that collection of unacknowledged parts Jung described, begins to tap the shoulder and request attention. The shadow is not an enemy, it is material. It is what was left out of your story because omission was necessary to survive. It contains the roads you did not take, the songs you did not sing, the tenderness you did not allow yourself to feel. When the shadow reappears, it brings with it a strange invitation to become whole. Not by excising faults, but by acknowledging and embracing them. Not by explaining every decision, but by forgiving why those decisions were made. At this phase, we learn that to forgive ourselves is to lighten the load in a way that mere achievement never could. The shift shows up in small, telling ways. You might wake and find that certain clothes no longer feel like you. You may realize with a strange relief that certain conversations leave you cold. Something you once treasured now feels heavy, like outdated armor. The hunger for external validation fades. The metrics of success change. Time is measured in the depth of moments, not in their quantity. Love changes too. It becomes less about completing a story and more about accompanying one another through the weather of life. It can settle into shared silences, the economy of small attentions, the kind of presence that honors rather than consumes. There is less performance and more witness. You love, not to fill a void, but to be present with another human being's process. And fear astonishingly loses its dominion. You've survived enough to know that many of the things that once terrified you are now merely background noise. Trauma and trouble have reshaped you into someone who can be touched without breaking. That resilience is not showy. It is quiet strength, embodied in a softer stance toward life, and a wiser selection of what is worth one's energy. This is why so many in this season pick up brushes and pens, return to classrooms, travel alone, or simply sit with the sunrise in a way they never did when urgency ruled their hours. They do not seek novelty for its own sake. They seek expression that is honest. The body may limit, but the soul's capacity for surprise remains vast. Creativity becomes a form of presence, a way to witness one's own interior life, and offer it back to the world in whatever modestness or grandeur it takes. There is also a ritual of letting go that this phase asks of us. Old versions of self must die for the new to be born. The need to be useful at all costs, the illusion of total control, the habit of rescuing others to the point of losing oneself, all these must be put down. When the shell falls away, the soul opens a window, breath deepens, so does sensitivity. Small things move you now, not because you are frail, but because you have finally unarmored your heart. And when you are unarmored, wounds do not become authority, they become teachers. You recognize how certain choices were made out of necessity, fear, survival, and you forgive them. This compassion is not indulgent, it is precise. It frees you to move with a new lightness. Lightness here means the capacity to hold history without being defined by it. Jung called this late individuation sacred because it is the stage when ego bows before soul. The outer world loses its headline status, the inner world becomes temple. To live like this is not to withdraw from life, but to enter it more fully. You learn to steward your own attention. You become discerning about what you will hold close and what you will release. You stop explaining yourself. You simply are. Presence becomes the language of relationships. You find yourself drifting away from that which depletes and toward what nourishes. You learn the strange art of keeping company with yourself. Solitude stops being absence and becomes depth. silence becomes a refuge rather than an accusation. This is freedom, to be alone without loneliness, to rest without guilt, to live without the relentless hunger for other people's approval. And here is the gift that ripens in this quiet season. When a soul becomes whole, it illuminates the field around it. Children, grandchildren, friends, even strangers can feel the steadiness and catch something of it. They are influenced not by advice but by example. How you stand, how you forgive, how you keep your promises to yourself. This influence is subtle and enduring. It does not shout, it lingers. At 60, the world has tested us enough that what remains is not a polished artifact, but a repository of living truth. You feel that truth in the way you rise, in the steadiness of your gaze, and in the ease with which you accept the ebb and flow of belonging and letting go. Decisions need no defense. Love needs no justification. Presence requires no audience. If you have felt this stirring, this quiet insistence that something must change, know that it is not selfish. It is an awakening. It is the soul claiming its rightful authority. It says, "Now I will live what remains, not out of duty, but from an honored desire to be myself." It is the last great apprenticeship, to live from the inside out. How do we answer this summons? Not with grand gestures necessarily, but with small, interior acts. We give ourselves permission to listen, to the aching for rest, to the joy in small things, to the loneliness that wants companionship of a different kind. We practice saying no when it preserves our integrity, and yes when it honors our longing. We make quiet repairs where we can, a letter unsent, a forgiveness withheld, a promise to ourselves to begin without asking permission. We cultivate rituals that nourish, a walk without a destination, a book read slowly, a journal where we speak plainly to ourselves. We also learn to accept fragility without letting it define us. The body will age, the soul does not have to. There is a paradox here. The more we accept the limits of the body, the more room we create for the life of the spirit. Presence deepens not because the world bends, but because we do. And so to those who now stand at or are approaching this curve, receive it not as loss but as invitation. Your life has not ended, it is turning. The restlessness you feel, the quiet dissatisfaction, the longing to be more truthful, these are not failures, they are signposts. The soul is asking to be heard. If you have read this far, perhaps you have already heard that whisper. Perhaps some part of you stirred. If so, give it a small, concrete yes. Sit in the silence and name what matters. Unpack one drawer of memory. Forgive one old self. Reach for a small joy you left behind. Each of these is a step back toward home. The second half of life need not be about surrendering to decline. It can be the great answer to the first half's striving, a time when everything once separated begins to stitch together. The wounded parts meet, not for judgment, but for recognition. The child and the elder sit down at the same table, and in a strange, gentle conversation, make peace. This is the true revolution of growing older, not to keep collecting, but to become a container for truth. Not to perform, but to be present, not to win, but to belong to yourself first, and then freely to others. When the curve appears, do not be afraid. It is a road that leads home. It asks little in the way of spectacle and everything in the way of truth. Walk it with curiosity, walk it with compassion, walk it with the willingness to meet all your parts, and in that meeting you will find, as many before you have found, that the soul does not age, it returns. It blooms, it opens in its own time, and when it does, what once felt like an ending becomes the beginning of a life lived more deeply, more lightly, more truly than you ever thought possible. Be who you are at last, quietly, courageously, and without apology. And so, when this hidden curve finally appears, it is not a sign of decline, but a sign of arrival. It is the moment when the ego bows and the soul rises, when masks fall and truth stands unshaken. At 60, Life does not ask you to keep running faster. It asks you to walk deeper, to stop living for appearances, and to start living for essence. The body may carry its years, but the soul remains timeless. What you once chased outside, you now discover within. This is not the end of your story, it is the chapter where meaning takes the pen. So, let this be the message. You are not too late. You are right on time. The unfinished parts of you are not failures, they are invitations. And the greatest journey is not out there, but here, back to yourself. At 60, you are not fading, you are unfolding. And those who dare to live this truth will find what all of life was pointing to from the beginning. The peace of finally being whole, the freedom of finally being yourself, and the quiet radiance of a soul that has come home.